That damp Tuesday morning in Seattle, the gray sky pressed heavily against the glass towers of the financial district, wrapping the cityscape in a cold drizzle. At 48 years old, I stepped into the glass-walled conference room on the 28th floor of Oralis Technologies, holding a 20-page formal dossier. Inside was my proposal for promotion to Vice President of Systems Innovation and Creative Director. For 8 relentless years, I had poured my life into this enterprise. I was not merely an employee who maintained existing code. I was the sole architect who built the AuraRenet artificial intelligence diagnostic platform from an experimental script into a system generating over $100 million in annual revenue. The air in the room smelled faintly of espresso and freshly laser-printed paper. At the head of the polished mahogany table sat Julian Drake, the Vice President of Engineering. His tailored charcoal suit was immaculate, his arms folded across his chest and his eyes cold behind rimless glasses. Beside him sat Bancroft Hayes, the Chief Executive Officer of Oralis Technologies, a man who measured human effort strictly by quarterly profit margins. I opened the binder and presented the metrics. Over the past 3 years, my algorithmic restructures had doubled processing efficiency, cut system latency by half, and improved diagnostic accuracy by 40% across 60 hospital networks. Major medical systems were expanding their enterprise subscriptions quarter after quarter. I looked Julian directly in the eyes and stated clearly that I was fully prepared to step into executive leadership to guide AuraRenet through its next expansion phase. Julian flipped through the pages with deliberate slowness, the crisp paper making a dry sound in the quiet room. He placed the binder back onto the table, adjusted his cufflinks, and offered a patronizing smile. "Raymond," he said in a smooth tone, "we certainly appreciate your technical diligence. You are an exceptional senior engineer, truly top tier with code. But leadership is about far more than mathematical precision. You simply do not possess executive presence. You lack the political maneuvering and strategic vision required to navigate high-level corporate dynamics." Bancroft Hayes leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. His voice was calm but completely unyielding. "Julian is correct, Raymond. Technical experts are vital to our foundation, but leaders must know when to step back from the machinery. For now, stay focused on your primary engineering responsibilities. Perhaps in another 2 or 3 years, we can revisit your career trajectory." I sat perfectly still, feeling a cold silence settle in my chest. In an instant, my mind flashed back through 8 years of grueling sacrifices. Staying in the laboratory until 3 in the morning, canceling long overdue vacations with my family, and drafting complex architectural frameworks that Julian Drake routinely signed his own name to during executive board meetings. I had foolishly believed that undeniable results spoke for themselves in a corporate environment. But standing before these men, I realized they viewed my dedication not as leadership potential, but as convenient, disposable labor. I took a slow breath, closed my folder, and looked at both of them. My voice remained steady as mountain stone. "I understand your perspective, gentlemen. Thank you for your time." Julian smiled, visibly relieved by what he assumed was passive compliance. "Excellent, Raymond," he replied. "Patience is the hallmark of a true professional." I nodded, gathered my documents, and walked out into the corridor. Through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows, the Seattle skyline flickered through the falling rain. I walked down the carpeted hallway to my corner office. On my heavy oak desk sat the physical prototype model of the AuraRenet core processor, its blue indicator lights blinking rhythmically. I sat down in my leather chair, opened my laptop, and navigated through my personal archives. I opened a confidential folder containing digital records of 30 foundational patents. Every single one had been conceived, drafted, and registered under my personal name prior to ever signing an employment contract with Oralis Technologies. I had never intended to use those patents as leverage or weapons. I had brought my technology to Oralis, believing in mutual growth and shared success. But Julian's arrogant declaration that I lacked leadership quality had severed my loyalty completely. I opened my personal notebook and wrote down a single principle. When a corporation refuses to recognize your true worth, allow them to experience the reality of your absence. I closed the notebook, opened the company project management dashboard, and systematically deleted my attendance from all non-mandatory executive strategy meetings scheduled for the coming weeks. I powered down my company cell phone and placed it inside my desk drawer. Outside, the rain beat softly against the window pane. The frustration inside me had vanished, replaced by an absolute quiet resolve. I was done giving away free labor to people who disdained my contributions. From this moment forward, I would do precisely what my job description mandated, and not a single line of code more. The next morning, I walked into the building at exactly 8:30, not a minute earlier. I passed through the lobby without stopping by the infrastructure laboratory, as I used to do every morning. As I walked down the engineering hallway, several junior developers offered hesitant nods. News of my denied promotion had already circulated among the staff. In their glances, I saw a mix of sympathy and nervous expectation, wondering how the chief architect of Aurora would respond to such a blatant slight. I sat at my desk, opened my assigned queue, and began reviewing standard maintenance tickets. Shortly after 10 o'clock, Brian Miller, the lead infrastructure engineer, rushed into my doorway, his face pale and sweating. "Raymond, we have a major anomaly in the clinical prediction module patch from yesterday," he blurted out. "The data pipeline is locking up at the pre-processing stage, and 3 regional hospital networks cannot pull diagnostic reports. We need you to jump into the root codebase immediately." I turned slowly in my chair and looked at Brian. A month ago, I would have immediately dropped everything, taken remote access of the servers, and spent 48 straight hours patching the memory leak. Instead, I answered with complete calm. "Brian, incident escalation and pipeline debugging fall under the purview of the Quality Assurance and Testing Division. My current assignment is strictly limited to reviewing subroutine documentation. You should contact the testing team lead." Brian blinked in utter disbelief. "But Raymond, you wrote the entire core engine. Nobody else knows how the multi-threaded algorithms interact. If we do not resolve this, the St. Louis Hospital Group will initiate contract penalties." I offered a faint nod. "I understand the severity, Brian, but executive management made it clear yesterday that I must restrict my focus to basic technical tasks and refrain from overstepping into operational leadership. Please follow official escalation protocols." Brian stood frozen for a moment, before turning around and walking briskly down the hallway. By mid-afternoon, Julian Drake appeared in my doorway, his expression tight and demanding. "Raymond, I hear you refused to assist Brian's team with the diagnostic pipeline failure this morning," he said, his voice rising slightly. "That level of passivity is concerning. I hope you are not letting personal disappointment affect your work ethic." I met his gaze without flinching. "Julian, I am performing the exact duties outlined in my contract. Executive management informed me yesterday that going beyond my assigned technical scope is inappropriate for my role. I am simply adhering to your directive." Julian's eyes narrowed into sharp slits. "This company runs on team players who take initiative, Raymond. If Aurora fails, it impacts everyone," I replied smoothly. "If Aurora is so fragile that it depends entirely on one engineer working uncompensated overtime, perhaps management should have prioritized retaining that engineer's goodwill." Julian turned sharply on his heel and walked away, slamming his office door behind him. I quietly opened my personal backup software and verified that all original documentation for my 30 patents was stored safely on an encrypted external hard drive. Every patent record bore my signature, official timestamps, and registration numbers from the United States Patent and Trademark Office, dated March 14, 2014. 4 months before my employment contract with Oralis Technologies had even been drafted. In the state of Washington, under Revised Code of Washington, Section 49.44.140, pre-existing inventions developed by an employee prior to employment remain the exclusive property of the inventor unless formally transferred through an explicit written assignment agreement. Oralis had only ever operated under an informal, non-exclusive verbal arrangement to utilize my technology while I served as lead architect. By Friday afternoon, the operational strain on Oralis Technologies was becoming catastrophic. Without my quiet daily interventions and unrecorded hot fixes, the AuroraNet platform began experiencing severe algorithmic drift. Patient diagnostic outputs across 5 major hospital systems in Missouri and Illinois were generating systematic error flags. Hospital administrators were flooding the corporate headquarters with urgent demands for resolution. Executive leadership was forced to suspend active data ingestion across the entire Midwest network. At 4 o'clock, an urgent broadcast email landed in my inbox. Bancroft Hayes had called an emergency, all-hands executive session in the main conference room on the 17th floor. The subject line read, AuroraNet Systemic Crisis. When I entered the glass conference room, the atmosphere was suffocating. Red alert metrics flashed across the massive display screens along the front wall. Bancroft Hayes sat at the head of the long glass table, his knuckles white as he gripped his pen. Julian Drake stood near the presentation screen, his collar unbuttoned and his tie loosened, looking visibly shaken. Several senior board members and regional account managers filled the leather chairs, their faces grim. As soon as I took my seat, Julian pointed a finger in my direction. Mr. Hayes, the core cause of this system drift lies in the uncooperative behavior of our principal engineer, Julian declared, his voice sharp with desperation. Raymond built the initial architecture, but over the past week he has deliberately withheld maintenance support, allowing critical modules to fail. I sat back comfortably in my chair, unrolled a small folder, and looked directly at the chief executive officer. Mr. Hayes, that accusation is demonstrably false, I stated in a calm, authoritative voice. I have fulfilled every single assigned task on my daily board. What Mr. Drake fails to inform this executive board is that AuroraNet was built entirely upon 30 proprietary algorithms that I personally invented, filed, and secured with the United States Patent and Trademark Office months before I ever set foot in this building. I opened my binder and projected digital copies of the patent filings onto the central screen. The documents clearly displayed my name as the sole author and inventor, along with registration dates from March 2014. The conference room went dead silent. Board members leaned forward, staring at the screen in disbelief. Bancroft Hayes looked from the screen to Julian Drake, his expression darkening rapidly. "What is the meaning of this, Julian?" Bancroft demanded, his voice dropping into a dangerous register. "Did legal not verify complete corporate ownership of the AuroraNet intellectual property portfolio when we launched the platform?" Julian stammered, his face losing all color. We assumed that all work conducted by senior staff automatically fell under standard work for hire, provisions of federal copyright and patent law. We had an implied assignment structure, I interjected with surgical precision. Under Title 35 of the United States Code and applicable state statutes, work-for-hire doctrines do not retroactively apply to patents filed prior to employment without a signed assignment contract and fair consideration. Oralis Technologies was granted a non-exclusive, revocable license to utilize my patented technologies strictly contingent upon my active employment and leadership as principal architect. Because management explicitly determined on Tuesday that my technical contributions and leadership were unneeded, I have formally revoked that non-exclusive operational consent. Effective immediately, Oralis Technologies is operating my 30 patented algorithms without legal authorization. A collective gasp echoed across the room. One of the senior board members slapped his hand onto the table. "Are you telling us that our flagship commercial product is running on unauthorized intellectual property?" he asked, his voice trembling with anger. Raymond looked at Bancroft Hayes. "That is precisely what I am telling you. If Oralis continues to process commercial data through the AuroraNet core without a formal patent licensing agreement, every diagnostic output constitutes willful patent infringement under federal law." Julian Drake stared at me, his mouth opening and closing silently. Bancroft Hayes buried his face in his hands as the reality of the situation hit the executive board like a freight train. The meeting adjourned in complete disarray. Executives rushed out of the room to summon the corporate legal team, while regional managers began frantically drafting apologies to hospital directors. I packed my leather briefcase, stepped out of the conference room, and walked toward the elevators. The hallway lights reflected off the wet glass windows overlooking Puget Sound. For 8 years, I had been treated as an invisible gear in their corporate machine. Now, The machine was grinding to a dead stop because they had refused to respect the hands that built it. As the elevator doors slid closed, I felt an intense sense of liberation. The storm had arrived at Oralis Technologies, and I was no longer standing in its path. Over the weekend, news of the technical collapse and legal uncertainty surrounding Oralis Technologies began leaking into industry publications. By Monday morning, the company's stock had already dropped by 12% as institutional investors reacted to rumors of contract suspensions from major healthcare providers. When I arrived at the office on Monday morning, 2 uniformed security guards stood near the main entrance, while corporate attorneys in dark suits hurried between executive suites. At 9 o'clock, Bancroft Hayes' executive secretary appeared at my office door. "Mr. Vance, the chief executive officer and senior legal counsel require your presence in the executive suite on the 22nd floor." Immediately, the 22nd floor conference room was reserved for high-stakes corporate negotiations. Present in the room were Bancroft Hayes, Julian Drake, and Dominic Wright, the senior managing partner of the company's outside intellectual property law firm. Dominic Wright was a silver-haired veteran attorney known for aggressive corporate litigation. A thick stack of patent registry files lay open before him on the glass table. As I took my seat across from them, Dominic Wright offered a stern, evaluating look. "Mr. Vance," he began in a measured tone, "I have spent the last 48 hours conducting an exhaustive review of your patent portfolio, alongside your original employment contract from 2014. I must acknowledge that your legal position regarding prior invention registration under Washington state law is exceptionally solid." Julian Drake spoke up furiously. "Mr. Wright, there must be an enforceable clause. He built the system while receiving a generous corporate salary." Dominic Wright held up a hand, silencing Julian instantly. "Silence, Julian," the attorney snapped. "You failed to execute a formal intellectual property assignment agreement upon his hiring. By law, Oralis possesses at best an implied shop right to use the technology on a limited basis, but we do not own the underlying patents. If Mr. Vance files for an immediate federal injunction under Title 35, Section 283, a federal judge could shut down the Orainate platform within 48 hours. Bancroft Hayes leaned across the table, his demeanor completely transformed from the arrogant executive I had faced the previous week. "Raymond," he said, his voice pleading and strained, "we acknowledge that mistakes were made in evaluating your position. Management was short-sighted. We want to rectify this immediately. I am prepared to offer you an emergency promotion to Chief Technology Officer effective today. We will double your current base compensation to $450,000 annually, grant you 200,000 stock options, and provide you complete authority over the engineering division. We only ask that you sign an immediate assignment of your 30 patents to Oralis Technologies." I looked at Bancroft Hayes, then turned my gaze slowly toward Julian Drake, whose jaw was clenched in bitter humiliation. I appreciated the astronomical numbers on the paper, but I also understood corporate psychology. If I accepted their offer under duress, they would use my patent assignment to stabilize their platform, recruit a replacement team over the next 6 months, and eventually marginalize me once again. Once a corporate executive shows you how little they value your humanity, believing their sudden monetary promises is pure foolishness. I took a breath and spoke calmly. "Mr. Hayes, your offer is generous, but it comes 8 years too late. Values and trust cannot be bought back with an emergency salary adjustment after you explicitly degraded my contributions. Last Thursday evening, I finalized discussions with Neurosyn Labs in San Francisco. I have accepted their offer to serve as Executive Vice President of Technological Innovation. Under our signed contract, I retain full, unencumbered personal ownership of all 30 of my foundational patents, while licensing them non-exclusively to Neurosyn for their upcoming medical intelligence initiative." Julian Drake stood up so abruptly that his leather chair slammed against the wall behind him. "You are leaving to join our direct competitor?" he yelled, his face turning red. "That is a flagrant breach of your non-compete clause. You are committing corporate sabotage." I looked at Julian with cold detachment. Julian, under Washington state law, Non-compete agreements executed without separate independent consideration at the time of hiring are legally unenforceable. Furthermore, my legal counsel has already notified your department that I am exercising my right to resign. Here is my formal 2-week notice of resignation. Bancroft Hayes fell back into his chair, looking utterly defeated. Raymond, please reconsider, Bancroft whispered. If you walk out that door with those patents, Aurora Net will be dead within months. Our enterprise valuation will collapse. I picked up my briefcase, stood tall, and looked down at the three men. Oralis Technologies did not collapse because I walked out, Mr. Hayes. It collapsed the moment you decided that technical creators are disposable assets who can be exploited without respect. You built your entire corporate empire on my foundation while denying me a seat at the table. Now, you will simply have to learn how to build your own structure from scratch. Without waiting for a response, I turned and walked out of the executive suite. As I walked down the long carpeted hallway toward the elevators, I felt a deep sense of internal peace. 8 years of suppressed frustration and unacknowledged labor dropped from my shoulders like heavy chains. As the elevator carried me down to the lobby, my phone buzzed with a text message from Douglas Thorne, the Chief Executive Officer of Neurosen Labs. Welcome aboard, Raymond. Your private laboratory space in San Francisco is fully prepared. The next chapter of my career had officially begun, and no corporate intimidation could ever take away what I had earned through my own intellect. 3 weeks later, I was settled into my new executive suite on the 16th floor of Neurosen Labs in downtown San Francisco. Through the massive panoramic windows, the morning fog drifted over the Golden Gate Bridge, bathing the state-of-the-art research facility in crisp light. Douglas Thorne had kept every single promise. I was granted an annual budget of $15 million, a team of 20 hand-picked senior engineers, and complete creative autonomy to design our next-generation diagnostic system. On the polished glass door of my office, a newly etched silver plaque read, Department of Technological Innovation, Director Raymond Vance. However, Oralis Technologies was unwilling to collapse in silence. 1 month after my departure, Oralis filed a high-profile federal lawsuit in the United States District Court for the Northern District of California. The complaint accused me of theft of trade secrets, breach of fiduciary duty, and unlawful conversion under the Defend Trade Secrets Act, 18 U.S.C. Section 1836. Oralis launched an aggressive public relations campaign, releasing statements to major technology news outlets, framing me as a disgruntled former employee who had maliciously stolen proprietary source code to sabotage his former employer. That evening, my picture was featured on the front page of national business journals under sensationalized headlines. Julian Drake gave a televised interview outside the courthouse, speaking with dramatic moral outrage. "We deeply respect intellectual property," Julian declared to the cameras, "but we cannot tolerate a former employee walking away with years of proprietary research that hundreds of dedicated workers built. We will pursue Mr. Vance to the full extent of federal law to protect our shareholders and public health partners." I sat in the main conference room of Neurosen Labs alongside Douglas Thorne and my lead defense counsel, Evelyn Carter. Evelyn was a legendary intellectual property trial attorney with 30 years of courtroom victories against ruthless corporate conglomerates. She reviewed the court filing with a calm, contemptuous smile. "Raymond, this lawsuit is pure legal theater," Evelyn declared, confidence shining in her eyes. "Julian Drake and Bancroft Hayes are using litigation as a public relations shield to distract their shareholders from their own catastrophic managerial failure. They hope to freeze your work at Neurosen through fear, but in a federal court of law, theatrical rhetoric means nothing without hard documentary evidence." 3 weeks later, the preliminary injunction hearing convened at the federal courthouse in San Francisco. The courtroom gallery was packed with industry journalists, tech analysts, and corporate observers. On the plaintiff's side sat Julian Drake, Bancroft Hayes, and a team of 6 corporate litigators. Across the aisle, I sat calmly beside Evelyn Carter. When the federal judge called the court to order, Oralis's lead attorney stood up aggressively, claiming that my departure had caused $50 million in operational losses. and demanding an immediate emergency restraining order to freeze my research at Neurosin Labs. When it was our turn to present, Evelyn Carter rose with absolute composure. She walked to the podium and placed a series of certified original exhibits before the court. Your Honor, defense submits Exhibit A, official certified records from the United States Patent and Trademark Office, establishing that all 30 disputed patent frameworks were conceived, registered, and owned exclusively by Dr. Raymond Vance prior to July 2014, months before his employment at Oralis began. Furthermore, we submit Exhibit B, original digital video recordings and lab notebooks from 2014 proving Dr. Vance had executed working prototypes before Oralis Technologies even established its research department. Evelyn turned toward the plaintiff's table, her voice ringing clearly through the silent courtroom. Oralis Technologies claims my client stole their property, but the documentary evidence proves conclusively that Oralis was operating on a permissive, uncompensated license of Dr. Vance's personal intellectual property. Under Title 35 of the United States Code, an inventor cannot steal his own registered patents. What Oralis calls trade secret theft is simply an inventor exercising his legal right to stop providing free intellectual capital to a company that breached its duty of good faith. Furthermore, Evelyn submitted sworn affidavits from 3 former Oralis software engineers who had recently resigned. The affidavits revealed a systematic pattern of corporate misconduct, led by Julian Drake, who had routinely forced junior developers to strip their names from patent filings and sign over technical credit. Under threat of termination, the revelation sent shockwaves through the courtroom. Reporters in the back row began rapidly typing on their laptops. Julian Drake's face drained of all color as the federal judge glared down at him from the bench. The judge slammed his gavel down firmly. The plaintiff's motion for a preliminary emergency injunction is denied. In its entirety, the judge ruled sternly. The documentary evidence presented by the defense is overwhelming. Oralis Technologies has failed to establish any probability of success on the merits. Furthermore, this court warns plaintiffs' counsel that continuing to pursue frivolous claims under the Defend Trade Secrets Act may result in severe court sanctions and legal fee recovery for the defense. Court is adjourned. As we walked out of the federal courthouse, a swarm of journalists surrounded the front steps. Cameras flashed continuously. A senior reporter held out a microphone and asked, "Dr. Vance, what is your response to Oralis Technologies' allegations that you betrayed their trust?" I stopped, looked directly into the camera lenses, and delivered a clear, measured response. "I did not betray anyone," I said evenly. "I spent 8 years building systems for a company that believed engineering talent was disposable. I took nothing that belonged to them. I simply reclaimed what was mine by law. True innovation belongs to those who create it, not to executives who exploit it." Over the next 48 hours, public opinion reversed dramatically across the technology sector. Financial news channels ran detailed segments analyzing Oralis's managerial collapse. Within 1 week of the court ruling, Oralis Technologies' board of directors convened an emergency meeting. Facing massive shareholder lawsuits and a plummeting stock price that had wiped out 40% of their market valuation, the board voted unanimously to terminate Julian Drake effective immediately for gross breach of fiduciary duty and corporate mismanagement. Bancroft Hayes was stripped of his executive authority and forced into early retirement. 3 days later, Oralis's legal team submitted a formal motion to unconditionally dismiss all legal claims against me with prejudice. The legal war was over, and my victory was complete. With the legal battles behind me, I focused my entire energy on building our new initiative at Neurosin Labs. Over the next 7 months, my team worked tirelessly to develop LunaOre, a revolutionary medical artificial intelligence platform designed to replace the aging, unstable architecture of Oranet. LunaOre was built on advanced self-optimizing neural networks that allowed medical diagnostic pipelines to operate with complete resilience against data corruption. Unlike Oranet, which required constant manual intervention, LunaOre possessed autonomous self-healing subroutines capable of maintaining diagnostic integrity even under severe network strain. When LunaOre was officially launched to the global medical market, the response was unprecedented. Within 3 months, over 80 major hospital networks, including the St. Louis and Chicago hospital groups, that had canceled their contracts with Oralis Technologies, signed multi-year enterprise agreements with Neurosin Labs. Independent clinical trials demonstrated that LunaOre achieved a 45% improvement in diagnostic processing speed and reduced false positive error rates to near zero. Industry publications hailed LunaOre as the gold standard of medical technology, while Neurosin Labs saw its market valuation triple within a single fiscal year. 1 year after leaving Seattle, I returned to the city to deliver the keynote address at the International Medical Technology Exposition held at the Seattle Convention Center. The vast auditorium was packed with over 3,000 executives, research scientists, and software engineers from across the globe. Standing at the center of the illuminated stage in a crisp navy suit, I looked out over the massive audience. Sitting in the front rows were several familiar faces, former colleagues from Oralis, who had moved on to new careers, as well as industry leaders who had once dismissed my technical contributions. I spoke without reading from prepared notes, my voice resonating clearly across the silent hall. A year ago, I sat in an executive office in this very city and was told that technical excellence was insufficient for leadership. I told the crowd. I was told that true leadership belonged only to those who maneuvered through corporate politics. But real leadership is not measured by administrative titles, corporate arrogance, or the ability to exploit the labor of others. True leadership is defined by technical integrity, the courage to defend your worth, and the commitment to build systems that elevate human life. When I concluded my address, the entire auditorium stood as one, breaking into a thunderous standing ovation that echoed through the vast hall. As I stepped off the stage, I felt no lingering bitterness or desire for vengeance. The satisfaction I felt was rooted in a quiet, unshakable peace. I had not sought to destroy my former employer, I had simply demanded that my worth be respected. By standing firm on my legal rights and personal dignity, I had built a legacy that no corporate boardroom could ever strip away. Later that evening, as the convention concluded, I walked alone along the waterfront at Elliott Bay. The rain had cleared, leaving a crisp, cool breeze blowing off the dark waters of Puget Sound. The distant lights of the Seattle skyline reflected off the gentle waves like a galaxy of glowing circuits. Looking up at the illuminated towers, where I had spent 8 years working in the shadows, I pulled my coat tight against the wind and smiled. I had left that corporate world behind not out of defeat, but to reclaim my freedom. And as I turned my back on the city lights and walked toward the future, I knew that my journey was only just beginning.